Daniel had always believed that love was strongest when built on trust, and for years he carried that belief as if it were the foundation of his life. His days were filled with meetings, long hours at the office, and countless business trips that kept him away from home. Yet no matter how heavy the workload, he returned to Sophia with a smile, believing that his efforts were for them, for the future they promised to build together. He never once questioned whether his absence created spaces she might struggle to fill. For him, the late nights were sacrifices worth making because he thought love could withstand the weight of time and distance. Sophia had once adored the way Daniel carried himself. His quiet confidence, his persistence, his determination to achieve something greater for their family. But as the years passed, the empty spaces in the evenings stretched longer, and her quiet moments grew heavier. She filled them with books, television, or quiet dinners alone, but none of those things silenced the loneliness that grew louder with each passing week. She told herself it was temporary, that Daniel's long hours were proof of his devotion, yet a different kind of hunger began building inside her. One Daniel never noticed. The turning point came quietly. Ethan, Daniel's friend since college, began visiting more often. At first, it seemed harmless. He was part of their lives for years, trusted enough to show up without warning, welcome enough to share a drink or a meal when Daniel wasn't around. Ethan was charming in a way Daniel wasn't. Where Daniel was steady and calm, Ethan was expressive and light-hearted. He noticed details Daniel overlooked, like the way Sophia styled her hair differently, or how she had taken up painting again after years of leaving the brushes untouched. He gave her attention in small but deliberate ways, attention that reminded her of what it felt like to be seen. Daniel remained blind to the shift. He trusted Ethan as much as he trusted Sophia, and in his mind, the bond between the three of them was unshakable. He even encouraged Sophia to spend time with Ethan, believing his presence offered her company during his long absences. What Daniel failed to see was the subtle change in Sophia's expressions whenever Ethan entered a room, the way laughter came more easily when Daniel wasn't there. He missed the late-night text notifications she brushed off with excuses about book clubs or online friends, too tired himself to dig deeper into her stories. Sophia battled guilt, but temptation crept in disguised as companionship. She told herself Ethan's visits filled a temporary void, that there was no harm in conversations or in sharing moments Daniel couldn't give. But late-night talks turned into secrets, and secrets turned into touches that lingered longer than they should. She knew she was crossing invisible lines, but the warmth of being wanted dulled the voice of her conscience. For the first time in years, she felt alive again, though it came at a price she wasn't ready to face. Daniel, unaware of the quiet betrayal building in his home, carried on with the same optimism that defined him. His colleagues often praised his work ethic, admiring how he balanced business with what seemed like a perfect marriage. He never thought twice about leaving Sophia behind for yet another trip, convinced she understood his sacrifices. The thought of betrayal never crossed his mind, because in his heart, Sophia was still the woman he met years ago, the one who laughed at his jokes and held his hand through storms. He didn't realize storms can also form in silence. The cracks in their marriage weren't loud. They didn't come in the form of arguments or slammed doors. They showed up as missed dinners, as a phone call cut short, as Sophia turning over in bed before Daniel could reach her. He interpreted it as exhaustion, as the side effect of adulthood, never imagining another reason. He remembered once, long ago, his father told him, "Never ignore silence in a marriage, it speaks louder than words." Daniel smiled at the advice back then, but he didn't carry it with him now. He mistook silence for peace, and that mistake grew into blind trust. Ethan played his role carefully, never showing more than what could be explained away if Daniel noticed. A compliment here, a joke there, all wrapped in the comfort of friendship. But the bond between him and Sophia deepened with each secret glance, each hidden message, each moment spent in the shadow of Daniel's absence. Sophia lived in two worlds, one where she was Daniel's wife, loyal and committed, and another where she was a woman rediscovering passion, though it came from the wrong source. The conflict weighed heavily on her, but she pushed it aside, convincing herself it was temporary, that she could control it. Daniel remained at the center of this story without knowing the narrative had shifted. He believed he was building a life for them both, a future Sophia could be proud of. Every decision he made was tied to her in some way, every success credited to her support. To him, Ethan was family, Sophia was his heart, and his home was unshakable. But beneath that surface, a truth waited quietly, a truth that would eventually destroy the very foundation he worked so hard to protect. In those moments leading up to the breaking point, Daniel's world appeared flawless from the outside. To neighbors, friends, and colleagues, he was the man who had it all: a career on the rise, a devoted wife, and a loyal friend. Yet the reality within his own walls was shifting in ways he couldn't see. The laughter that once filled the home carried a different meaning now, and the silence he trusted so deeply was slowly preparing him for the day when everything would collapse with a single glance. A single truth too heavy to ignore. Word count 768. White heavy check mark. Would you like me to move forward and write section 2? 760 words. The discovery, in the same faceless, sharp style. Daniel had always pictured home as a safe place, a space that carried warmth no matter how hard the outside world became. That belief was still intact the evening he left the office earlier than planned. A client meeting had been cancelled, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the rare excitement of going home before the streetlights turned on. He decided not to call Sophia, wanting the surprise to feel pure, the kind that reminded them of earlier years when small gestures were enough to make them smile. He even thought about picking up her favorite dessert on the way, something she used to crave after long days. His heart felt lighter than it had in months, unaware that the next few hours would carve scars that would never heal. As he pulled into the driveway, something unsettled him, though he couldn't immediately place what it was. A car sat parked along the street, one he didn't recognize at first glance. He brushed the thought away, telling himself it belonged to a neighbor's visitor. The mind often explains away the very details it should cling to, and Daniel had spent years practicing trust so deeply that suspicion no longer found space in him. With keys in hand and a heart warmed by anticipation, he stepped toward the door, never expecting that each step was carrying him closer to a truth he wasn't prepared to face. The house was quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. He was used to silence, but this one carried weight, as though the walls themselves were holding back a secret. He set his things down softly, listening for Sophia's voice, expecting it to drift down the stairs or call out from the kitchen. Instead, faint sounds carried through the air, distant and muted, but unmistakably human. A soft laugh, a hushed tone, a rhythm of voices not meant for him. His chest tightened. The surprise he thought he was bringing home began to shift into something else, though his mind fought against the idea. Every step he took felt heavier, his body moving while his thoughts scrambled to make sense of what he was hearing. He wanted to believe it was innocent, perhaps a friend stopping by, maybe Sophia on the phone with someone who had her laughing in a way he hadn't heard in too long. But deep down, his instincts whispered the truth he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Years of trust tried to silence that voice, but instincts don't lie, and the sound of muffled movement above him confirmed what his heart already feared. Daniel's pulse raced as he climbed the stairs, the weight of each step echoing in his ears. He moved slowly, as though delaying the inevitable could keep the world from breaking. The air felt heavier near the top, carrying with it a mix of sounds he couldn't ignore. His hand trembled as it reached for the door handle, the metallic chill sending a shiver through his body. He paused, staring at the door as though it could give him answers without needing to be opened. For a fleeting moment, he thought of turning back, of pretending he heard nothing, of protecting the image of love he had carried for so long. But truth has a way of demanding to be seen. When the door opened, the world he knew ended. He froze, not because he didn't understand what he saw, but because the reality of it hit him so completely that his body couldn't move. There they were, Sophia and Ethan, in a closeness that shattered every memory, every promise, every belief he had built his life upon. It wasn't just the physical act that broke him, it was the betrayal in their eyes, the undeniable proof that trust had been erased long before this moment. Clothes discarded without care, the intimacy of the room suffocating him more than any words could. Sophia's expression shifted instantly from laughter to horror. Ethan's confidence vanished, replaced by the guilt of a man caught stealing something he never should have touched. Daniel stood silent, no words rising to the surface, only the sharp sting of disbelief cutting deeper with each second. He thought anger would come, that rage would consume him, but instead there was nothing, just numbness, a void where love used to be. He felt like a man watching his own life collapse from outside his body, powerless to stop it. No one spoke. The silence grew unbearable, louder than shouting, heavier than accusations. Daniel's eyes searched Sophia's face, looking for some explanation, some shred of truth that could undo what stood before him. But there was nothing left to explain. Betrayal doesn't require words, it screams on its own. His gaze shifted briefly to Ethan, the man he once called brother, and the weight of that betrayal cut even deeper. With a breath that felt heavier than stone, Daniel stepped back. He didn't lash out, didn't scream, didn't demand. He simply let the silence speak for him. Slowly, he turned, his hand finding the doorframe as though he needed it to steady himself. He closed the door behind him, the quiet click echoing louder in his chest than any slammed door ever could. Each step down the stairs felt like walking through a life that no longer belonged to him. By the time he reached the front door, Daniel knew nothing would ever be the same again. The world he built, the trust he lived by, the love he sacrificed for, all of it had collapsed in the span of a single moment. Outside, the night air felt cold, almost cruel, as he walked into it without direction, carrying with him the image that would haunt him forever. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty: a door had been opened, and nothing could close it again. Word count 765, white heavy check mark. Do you want me to continue with section 3, 760 words, the aftermath and truth revealed, in the same sharp, faceless narration style. Daniel drove with no destination, the road stretching endlessly beneath him, headlights cutting through a darkness that felt heavier than the night itself. His hands gripped the steering wheel, but his mind wasn't on traffic or direction. It replayed the moment over and over, the sight that tore through him like glass. He tried to blink it away, but every time he closed his eyes, it returned in sharper detail, refusing to fade. He questioned everything: when had it begun? How long had it been happening? And most painfully, why had he never seen it? The thought circled like a storm. Had his devotion blinded him? He wondered if working late nights, chasing stability, and planning for the future had become excuses to ignore the present. Perhaps Sophia had felt abandoned, perhaps Ethan had seen that weakness and taken advantage. But even if loneliness had crept into their home, Daniel knew choices had been made, choices that required deceit, that required betrayal, that required the deliberate act of letting someone else take what was never theirs to have. Responsibility could be shared, but betrayal could never be excused. His phone lit up on the seat beside him. Sophia's name appeared again and again, her desperate attempts breaking through the silence of the car. He didn't answer. The weight of her voice, even imagined, was unbearable. Each vibration was a reminder that she still existed in his life, but no longer in the way he once believed. He turned the phone over, screen face down, as if refusing to see her name could also erase what she had done. When he finally returned home the next morning, the house looked unchanged from the outside, but he knew stepping through the door would never feel the same again. Sophia was waiting, eyes swollen from crying, hands trembling as though she had rehearsed words all night but found none that could bridge the gap between them. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice broke under the weight of what had already been seen. Her excuses came tangled in fragments: loneliness, neglect, needing to feel alive again, but every word only deepened the divide. Daniel listened without interrupting, his face still, his silence more condemning than any accusation. Sophia's confession wasn't about Ethan, not entirely. It was about emptiness, about moments when she felt invisible in a marriage that once made her glow. Yet as she spoke, Daniel couldn't shake the image of her with Ethan, the man he trusted most outside of her. That image overshadowed every reason she tried to give. He realized explanations don't undo choices, they only dress them in words that arrive too late. What was broken couldn't be stitched together with regret. Ethan reached out as well, a message filled with apologies that rang hollow before Daniel even read them. There was no version of the future where forgiveness could exist between them. Friendship required loyalty, and Ethan had shattered that bond in its purest form. Daniel deleted the message without replying, severing a connection that had already died the moment he opened that door. Some endings don't require arguments, they require silence and finality. In the days that followed, Daniel moved through life in fragments, his body present but his mind elsewhere. At work, his colleagues noticed the distance in his eyes, but no one dared to ask. At home, Sophia lingered in shadows, apologizing in gestures he didn't acknowledge. Meals sat untouched, words hung unspoken, and the weight of what happened filled every corner of the house. The place that once carried laughter and love now echoed with betrayal, a constant reminder that trust, once broken, could never be fully rebuilt. Daniel considered the life they had shared, the years spent building what he thought was unshakable. But love, he learned, isn't destroyed by storms or arguments, it erodes quietly when loyalty is replaced with lies. He understood now that betrayal didn't happen in a single night, it had been forming silently, fed by neglect, loneliness, and choices made in the dark. By the time he discovered it, the foundation had already crumbled. When Sophia begged for another chance, Daniel looked at her not with anger but with a final kind of sadness. He realized he no longer saw her as the woman he once trusted. She had become a stranger wearing the face of his wife. Trust couldn't be rebuilt with promises, and love couldn't survive without trust. He told her nothing dramatic, no grand speeches or shouts. He simply said he couldn't live in a home that no longer felt like his. His voice was calm, but its calmness was colder than rage. Sophia broke down, pleading, insisting she would change, that what happened didn't erase everything they had. But Daniel understood better than anyone, betrayal doesn't erase the past, it rewrites it. Every memory he held of their life together was now painted with doubt, every smile shadowed by the knowledge of what she had hidden. Nothing could return what was lost. So he left, not with anger, not with violence, but with the quiet resolve of a man who knew the story had ended. He walked away from the home they built, from the life he thought was permanent, from the love he believed indestructible. In his silence was strength, and in his departure was the truth Sophia would carry forever. She hadn't just lost him for a moment, she had lost him for a lifetime. Daniel carried forward with the understanding that betrayal leaves scars deeper than words can describe. It changes the way a person loves, the way they trust, the way they see themselves. He knew healing would take time, but he also knew survival was possible. The memory of that night would never vanish, but it would become a reminder of the cost of blind trust, of the danger of ignoring silence, and of the power of walking away when respect is gone. And though he never spoke it aloud, the truth followed him like a shadow. The night he opened the door was the night everything changed, and nothing that came after would ever return him to who he was before. Word count 767 white heavy check mark. Would you like me to now create the final title plus YouTube style description? Short, suspenseful, faceless story vibe to wrap this into a polished upload ready script. Time moved differently after that night. Days stretched longer, nights heavier, as though the clock itself wanted Daniel to feel the weight of every second. He carried himself through routines, but his life no longer felt like his own. The betrayal had stripped him of something deeper than love, it had taken away certainty. Certainty in people, certainty in promises, certainty in the very idea that loyalty meant something. He looked at the world differently now, through eyes that had learned the cruel lesson that trust could vanish in an instant. Sophia tried to hold on. She filled the silence with apologies, letters left on the kitchen table, messages that begged him to remember the years they had spent together. She promised change, promised devotion, promised that what happened was a mistake born from weakness. But Daniel knew mistakes are accidents, and betrayal is a choice. She had chosen to open the door to Ethan, chosen to let him in again and again, chosen to hide it until the truth exposed itself. Promises now sounded like noise, incapable of stitching back the pieces she had torn apart. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't punish her with rage. Instead, he let his silence speak. That silence unsettled her more than any argument could have, because silence was final. Silence meant there was nothing left to fight for. He moved differently in the house, his presence distant, his eyes detached. She couldn't reach him because he wasn't hers anymore, even if his body was still there. The bond that once tied them had dissolved the moment he saw her with another man. Ethan disappeared from their lives as quickly as he had invaded them. He sent a few messages, each one dripping with regret and explanations Daniel never cared to read. To Daniel, Ethan no longer existed. A friend who could betray so deeply wasn't a friend at all. It wasn't anger that cut Ethan out, it was clarity. Once someone shows you who they truly are, there's no need for a second look. Daniel had given him years of loyalty, and Ethan had repaid it with deceit. That chapter was closed without ceremony. The hardest part wasn't losing Ethan. It wasn't even losing Sophia in the way he once knew her. The hardest part was losing the version of himself that believed in unbreakable bonds. He realized he could rebuild his life, but he would never again be the man who trusted without question. There was grief in that, grief for the innocence of belief, grief for the man who thought love alone was enough. Infidelity doesn't just wound, it reshapes. It turns a person into someone new, whether they want the change or not. Sophia pleaded for forgiveness, but Daniel understood forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. He could release the anger, but he could never return to what they had. Love can survive hardship, but it cannot survive betrayal. That truth became his anchor, keeping him steady when her tears tried to pull him back. She wanted to erase what had happened, but erasure was impossible. Once the image had burned into his mind, it could never be undone. She wanted the man who trusted her to return, but that man had walked out the door the night he discovered her secret. Eventually, Daniel left not just in spirit but in body. He packed what mattered, leaving behind the house that had become a museum of broken vows. Sophia watched him go, begging him to reconsider, but he didn't pause. He carried only the weight of his decision, firm and unshaken. Some choices aren't made out of desire, they're made out of necessity. And this was one of them. Staying would have meant living with ashes, and Daniel refused to let betrayal define the rest of his life. And the solitude that followed, Daniel began to rebuild. Slowly, quietly, he learned how to live again. It wasn't easy. Nights haunted him with memories, mornings greeted him with reminders of loss, but in between, he found fragments of strength. He poured himself into work, into small routines, into the simple act of moving forward. Healing didn't come quickly, but it came steadily. He realized survival wasn't about forgetting, it was about carrying the memory without letting it control him. Sophia remained in the ruins of her choices. Her apologies turned into silence when she realized nothing could change the outcome. She learned too late that a single act could undo years of devotion. The man who once looked at her with love now looked through her as though she were already a part of the past. She had gambled everything for a fleeting sense of validation, and in return, she lost the one person who had given her unconditional trust. Daniel never looked back. He didn't linger in bitterness or allow hatred to define him. Instead, he accepted the truth for what it was. Some stories don't end with reconciliation, some wounds don't heal into old forms, and some doors, once open, can never be closed. His life had been rewritten, not by choice, but by reality. And though the memory would always remain, he understood now that endings are also beginnings. The night he opened that door marked the death of the life he once knew, but it also marked the start of something else, a life built on clarity, resilience, and the hard-earned knowledge that trust is sacred, and once broken, it never returns the same. In losing Sophia and Ethan, Daniel gained a truth he would carry forever. Betrayal doesn't define who you are, but how you rise after it does. Word count 764 white heavy checkmark. Do you want me to now craft the final YouTube ready title and description? Short, gripping, faceless story style for this full 4-section script.